truly, for some men, nothing is written unless they write it.
Omar Sharif is a pioneer, and I think he should be celebrated for that as one of the first, if not the first, Arab actor to actually cross over and become a Hollywood star, in the truest sense of the word.
Have you no fear, English?
He could do a lot of different kinds of roles, from these very weighty epics to a charming romance. He always had a sort of sparkle in his eye, and that really came across on screen.
You crazy girl. What are you doing here?
He was this incredible figure, this beautiful, fierce soul that had these astonishing eyes and this astonishing sort of stare.
He's totally committed in every role that he makes, and that's, I think, why people loved him.
I hate everything you say, but not enough to kill you for it.
He's a linguist, a great bridge player, and also a major Hollywood star.
Omar Sharif was born Michel Dimitri Chaloub in 1932 in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the crossroads of the world for thousands of years. He's born into a Mechanite Catholic family.
The family moved from Alexandria to Cairo when young Omar was 4 years old. His parents were Syrian Lebanese and quite celebrated as a couple, actually.
His father was a very successful timber merchant who had come to Egypt from Lebanon. His mother, Claire, was a very popular society hostess. In fact, she used to have King Farouk over to the family house many times for her fabulous parties, and they used to play cards together.
This is obviously where Omar himself got a great deal of his addiction to the games of gambling and cards, and his particularly fine way of playing bridge.
When he was 10, his parents sent him to an English-style boarding school in Cairo, and while he was there, he really excelled at languages, something that would help him as an actor later.
In fact, he ended up being able to speak 7 languages fluently.
He was obviously highly intelligent, because when he got to the University of Cairo, he switched from languages into sort of mathematics and physics. So he had an able brain. And by the time he was finished at the University of Cairo, he went off to London to join RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, to learn acting.
So after RADA, he went back to Cairo, and instead of going into acting there, he actually joined his father's business in the wood merchant business. And he spent quite a long time. He spent 5 years actually doing it, so one can assume he wasn't unhappy there. But he got his first opportunity to be in a film through an old family friend.
One of the people his family knew well, apart from King Farouk, was Yusuf Shaheen, who was Egypt's best director by a long way, and he was famous for many years. And he suddenly asked Omar to star with a famous Egyptian star in The Blazing Sun.
بطاطس.
أحمد، إزيك يا أحمد؟
الحمد لله على السلامة.
غريبة، أنت كبرت قوي.
والله أنا حاولت أفضل قصير، لكن ما قدرتش.
لا بس إزيك يا أحمد؟
الله يسلمك.
This was a really nice opportunity for Michel, but it provided an extra bonus in the fact that the film starred Egypt's greatest female star at the time, Faten Humama, who was a great beauty, and not unsurprisingly, the young Michel fell madly in love with her. In fact, they fell in love together, so that worked very well.
She'd never kissed anyone in a film before, and she kissed him. And it was dynamite in the whole of the Arab-speaking world. They became the couple in film.
Within a year of that film, of their meeting, they were married. This entailed, of course, because she was Muslim, Michel actually converting to Islam, and at which point he changed his name from Michel to Omar El Sharif.
So that's how his career started. The Blazing Sun actually was shown at Cannes, didn't get a prize. But soon afterwards, he was in a lot of Egyptian films. I think he was in over 20 Egyptian films. Egypt was the Hollywood of Africa, and indeed the Hollywood of the Middle East. So it was important that he was a big star there.
The next major step for him was to be in the 1958 film called Gohar, which was at the Cannes Film Festival in 1958 and was eligible for the Palme d'Or. It didn't win, but it did win the jury prize. And it was also the debut of the very young Claudia Cardinale. I think that it was the moment where one became aware of the fact that there was a new young actor in town. It didn't make huge waves beyond Egypt and beyond certain parts of Europe. It didn't get a huge distribution, but it's certainly worth a look again.
Egypt was going through a period of political turmoil following a revolution in 1952, and movement in and out of the country was limited. American producer Sam Spiegel managed to secure Omar Sharif an exit visa, so the actor could star in his production, the epic Lawrence of Arabia.
One of Omar Sharif's finest performances, and the one that really launched his international career, was, of course, in David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia. He's playing Sharif Ali, who's a tribesman who starts to pact with Lawrence and help him out. Probably the greatest introduction of any character on screen ever is when we have this very long shot of this little speck in the distance, and it comes closer and closer, and it's Omar Sharif on his camel. What a wonderful cinematic introduction.
Lean just wanted to capture the kind of the mirage, the kind of the blurring, and out of it hovers this figure. And what's so miraculous about the shot is that it hovers in the air, this figure, getting bigger and bigger, sort of floating.
He is one of the most spectacular entries into any film through the mirage, which was created by the cinematographer with a special lens to create that effect of him just riding out of the mirage and into the foreground. That lens actually, incidentally, has never been used for any other film and is now in a museum.
He comes out of the mirage on a horse, and it is every gorgeous, romantic thing that you could ever imagine, and it made him an instant star.
I am Ali ibn al-Kharish.
I've heard of you.
So, what was Hazmi doing here?
He was taking me to help Prince Faisal.
You have been sent from Cairo.
Yes.
I have been in Cairo for my schooling. I can both read and write. My Lord Faisal already has an Englishman.
Yes.
What is your name?
My name is for my friends.
David Lean said he cast him, just a scattering of headshots were on a table in front of him, and he noticed Omar Sharif's black eyes. And he thought that would be such a great contrast to Peter O'Toole with his blue eyes.
He understood, I think, that if you're going to have Peter O'Toole, then he must show the equivalent almost. The counterpoint was a man equally as beautiful on the opposite side. He brings so much passion to the role. It's a stunning debut, in American films.
You are mad. To come to Aqaba by land, we should have to cross the Nefud Desert.
That's right.
The Nefud cannot be crossed.
I'll cross it if you will.
You? It takes more than a compass, Englishman. The Nefud is the worst place God created.
I can't answer for the place, only for myself.
Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole loved each other. They were like brothers. It was so intense that Peter O'Toole called him Freddie, because he said, nobody's named Omar Sharif. I'm not calling you Omar Sharif, you're Freddie. And that's the way they were for the rest of their lives.
They were something of wild boys on the set. Obviously, they'd be out in the desert all day shooting, but when they could get to Beirut, they were really famous for going out to all the nightclubs, a bit of gambling, a bit of drinking. So they got quite a reputation, and I think that helped cement their friendship.
Look, Ali, if any of your Bedouin arrived in Cairo and said, we've taken Aqaba, the generals would laugh.
I see. In Cairo, you will put off these funny clothes. You will wear trousers and tell stories of our quaintness, barbarity. And then they will believe you.
You're an ignorant man.
Of course, Lawrence of Arabia was a masterpiece, regaled by the critics. It was popular with audiences. It won Omar Sharif the Golden Globe and also got him his first Oscar nomination.
The film was not shown in any other Arab country except Egypt, but was a massive success everywhere else. So he'd been in a big international hit, and he was really made.
Omar Sharif was now an international star. However, when the actor had agreed to star in Lawrence of Arabia, Sharif had signed an unfavorable contract.
Sam Spiegel, who was the kind of rather ruthless producer, who had this kind of double-pronged reputation where he put together these kind of glorious epic productions with great talents and sort of fostered them, at the same time drove a very hard bargain and was kind of thought of as manipulative and, in his own way, a little bit of a confidence trickster. And certainly for an actor untried like Omar Sharif, he said, well, this is a standard contract for an actor of your experience. And it was for about, I think, $15,000, about sort of £8,000. And it gave him the right to the next 7 films, I think it was. So effectively, he was under contract with Sam Spiegel.
That was the fixed rate for all 7 films. Now, that might sound like a lot of money. It's probably sounded like a lot of money to him at the time. Unfortunately, what happened is that once you've made a film like Lawrence of Arabia and you become a huge international star, then of course you're at liberty to command a greater salary, which he was unable to do because of the contract.
Now that Sharif had managed to leave Egypt, the actor was faced with the decision of either returning to the country of his birth or continuing his career on the world stage.
Once he was established on the international scene, there was no going back to Egypt. He could have done, but then he would have been stuck in the Egyptian film industry. And so he saw that there was a real opportunity for him to actually be, well, I mean, a Hollywood star, you know. And unfortunately, that meant sacrificing quite a lot. It meant sacrificing his marriage. The separation was awful for them, and it clearly didn't last. And they did get divorced, but it was amicable.
We mustn't forget the clergy and the Guardia Civil are on the same side, Father. Both trying to serve our country. You by prayers and I by enforcing the law.
I can't tell you.
Every citizen must help defeat the enemies of our nation, Father.
If you try to force me to tell you something my vows forbid me to tell, then you are also desecrating the church.
Father, I'm not forcing you to anything. I only hope you know where your duty lies.
He starred in Behold a Pale Horse with Gregory Peck and Anthony Quinn. This is for director Fred Zinnemann. The film itself got some mixed reviews, but the critics really singled out Omar Sharif's performance, partly because it was such a different role than what he had done in Lawrence of Arabia. Here he's playing a priest living about 20 years after the Spanish Civil War. And the critics remarked this showed a lot of range that he had.
It is a really, really interesting change of face for him, change of part. He's very vulnerable, he's a very open, he's shaved his moustache off, and he holds the screen very, very well against major stars like Gregory Peck and Anthony Quinn.
What are you planning to do with me?
Why? Think I might kill you?
Only 2 years ago, one of our priests was in the bank in San Martin when you robbed it. You knocked him loose from his senses and he has never recovered.
Priests should stay out of banks.
He said afterwards it was a bad film from a good director. But Fred Zinnemann said of him that he was one of the finest actors he'd ever worked with. It wasn't a very good film, and it didn't really work as it should have. Even so, it added to his laurels because he got the best notices of anyone.
My name is David. Do you mind if I sit down?
You certainly may not.
I met this gentleman just now in the line.
And you met some Moroccan soldiers, too. It doesn't justify it.
Mrs. Millet, please forgive my rudeness, but I've heard so much about you both in my country and abroad that I couldn't possibly let this opportunity slip by.
What is your country?
Yugoslavia.
And you've heard about me in Yugoslavia?
Is there anywhere in the world one has not heard of the fabulous Mrs. Millet?
He then went on to a sort of slightly lighter film, not exactly a comedy, called The Yellow Rolls Royce, which was a sort of portmanteau film in which the common element was, in fact, the vehicle of the title. He plays the part of a Yugoslav partisan, and without actually seeming to do very much in terms of, acting or accents, he's completely credible. I mean, he just looks like a Yugoslav, but I suppose that multi-ethnic sort of arrangement of the Slavs anyway suited his particular looks perfectly.
I love the Yellow Rolls Royce. It's got a wonderful theme song, and it's got that wonderful yellow Rolls Royce, which goes through all kinds of adventures as it passes from person to person. But the most poignant segment in it is Omar Sharif's with Ingrid Bergman, and he plays a Yugoslav partisan. This is right, I think, during the war, before the war. And they fall in love with each other. Their part is beautiful, and the whole filming around it is beautiful, the theme song, their moments together. And you see what his power was.
It's very hard sometimes to find words to say what is in one's heart.
Dear Mr. Davidge, it's always impossible, and therefore far better never to try.
You have a very generous spirit, and that is not the least of the things I found out about you during the last 24 hours.
No sentimental gush, please.
Omar Sharif once again got better notices than most others in the cast, and he was capable of that. He always seemed to be noticed in his films and appreciated.
A treaty?
The Shah of Khwarizm imposed a truce. All have sworn to it. All observe it. No warrior is permitted to carry arms here.
Good, then we can take our pick without fighting.
You do not understand, Temujin. The truce was signed.
I did not sign it. The slaves did not sign it.
But...
Will there be women among the slaves?
Yes, Lord.
Good. My men have horses and weapons, but no women. How long do you think they will stay without women? How long will you?
In 1965, he played Genghis Khan in the film Genghis Khan. You could say maybe he's not perfectly cast as a Mongol leader, but then remember, the previous on-screen Genghis Khan was John Wayne, so we're getting closer to a sensible casting.
It's a right melodramatic B-movie type epic that tells the life story of Genghis Khan. But to be fair to Omar Sharif, who brings to it a certain kind of steadiness and charisma, you do kind of believe he could be a Mongol more than perhaps others. That kind of strangely flexible nationality and ethnicity he had could be put to use.
These Manchurian invaders, you would like them destroyed as soon as possible.
Unfortunately, my army has melted away.
I will raise you another one.
Mongols? How much?
You mean money?
What else do soldiers fight for?
Large chest of gold for each of my 3 brothers-in-law, so that I can send them out to recruit only the best men.
How could I be sure I was not just replacing one army of invaders with another?
You cannot be sure.
He played these different characters, and he played them to the best of his ability. You never, ever get the sense with Omar Sharif that he's throwing something away. You never, ever see thinking, he's not committed. He's totally committed in every role that he makes, and that's, I think, why people loved him.
For his performance in Dr. Zhivago, Omar Sharif was awarded the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor.
I bought you this. It has a piece in it about young Russian poets.
Oh, good. Thank you. Does it mention me?
It begins with you. You're the best.
Very intelligent nation, the French.
He reunited with David Lean for another epic, Dr. Zhivago. What a wonderful romantic film, a sort of sweeping epic of Russia. David Lean said he knew Omar Sharif wasn't the most typical casting for this sensitive Russian poet. It's not immediately how studio heads thought of him.
He wasn't due to play the good doctor at first. Also, Peter O'Toole was thought of, but he couldn't do it, and several others were asked too. Michael Caine was even asked.
David Lean fought for him to have the role. He knew he could do this after working with him from Lawrence of Arabia. And he does. It's this brooding, emotional performance. He looks great. He looks great with Julie Christie. You believe the chemistry between them.
Do you ever come to Moscow?
From Grado.
If only there was someone to look after you. But of course, if there were, I'd be destroyed by jealousy.
Zhivago, don't. My dear, don't, please.
It was a very difficult shoot because it was done in intense heat in the summer, and they all had to wear these heavy clothes as if it was winter. And he said, Omar said, he nearly had a nervous breakdown because not only was it a big part for him, the biggest he'd ever done, but Lean was very demanding of him. And he had his eyes taped up. They thought he looked too Middle Eastern, and he had a wig on as well, and the makeup lasted a long time every day. So it was a hideous time for him.
What shall we do? Can we get on a train?
No, they'd arrest us on the spot.
I don't want to stay here and wait.
No. Listen. We could go to
Varikino.
We'd find out sooner or later.
Yes, but later. And if our days are really numbered, Yuri.
Yes. We'd better live them.
For me, it's just a wonderful saga. It's a wonderful lose yourself in film. And a lot of that has to do with Sharif's passivity, that the character Zhivago isn't a warrior, isn't a kind of striking, exciting leading man. He is calm and he is soulful and he is the opposite of all the other characters. And what draws Lara to him is that she sees what's inside him, this kind of great heart.
If we'd had children, Yuri, would you like a boy or a girl?
I think we may go mad if we think about all that.
I shall always think about it. Will you write today?
No, not today.
The critics thought that the film wasn't right about the poetry of the man, Dr. Zhivago, but was very good with the romance between him and Julie Christie. And that was the thrust of the film. It was more a romance than a historical epic. And it was hugely successful just because of that. So Omar then became a major star. There's no question about it.
Pietska, a prostitute, also one of our agents. She was stabbed to death, most brutally. Cut to pieces, in fact.
A charming story. But what has that to do with us?
Preliminary investigation has established that each of you was, well, unaccounted for last night.
To whom should we be accountable, Major?
I fail to see what our movement should have to do with you or with this woman's death.
The murderer was seen leaving the woman's room.
The final film that he made for Spiegel, which was the last one he had to make, was this very, very strange film, The Night of the Generals. Anatole Litvak's sort of Nazi thriller, murder thriller.
He reunited with Peter O'Toole for Night of the Generals, directed by Anatole Litvak. Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole weren't that keen to sign on for this film. In particular, Omar Sharif really didn't want to play a Nazi. He said it was against his morality. He didn't want to wear this uniform even on a film set. But they were still under contract to Sam Spiegel, so he convinced them to do it. I mean, it's still a quite big film production. It wasn't a huge box office hit, but it's certainly not an embarrassment.
The only reason, apart from the fact he was contractually obliged to, that he actually did take the role was because his old friend Peter O'Toole was in it. I think they behaved very badly on the film. I think they had a wonderful time making it, and they get away with it by the skin of their teeth.
Hey! That's my horse.
How can it be yours? Can't you see that this is a nobleman's horse?
And what makes you think you're a nobleman?
I am the prince, ruler of all this land, as far as the eye can see.
And I am Isabel of Spain.
His next film was Cinderella Italian Style by famous Italian director Francesco Rossi, and it showed that he could actually play in a lighter vein than he had before. He plays a prince who falls in love with a peasant girl. The peasant girl happened to be Sophia Loren, so it was quite an amusing film, light-hearted film, but one with, again, the romance between the two was thought to be very fetching. And the film was quite a big success for a European film.
Can you wash dishes well?
That's what I'm doing here.
You never break them?
No, would it matter?
Tomorrow you'll wash more dishes than you've ever washed before in your life. God help you if you break a single one.
He works well opposite Sophie Loren. He was always wise enough to know as an actor that when to back off when you've got a big spirit in front of you. And he keeps his sort of character kind of calm in the face of, and kind of calm and wry and sort of slightly raised eyebrow compared to Sophie Loren's sort of great sort of swampy emotion. And it's one of his better films.
Fanny, you're an enchanting girl. I wish I could get to know you better.
So give me 6 good reasons why not.
Just one. I have to catch a train for Kentucky early in the morning.
What's in Kentucky?
Oh, a half interest in a little farm. I breed horses.
What's the matter? They can't do it alone.
He's next cast in Funny Girl as the part of Barbra Streisand's husband, Nicky Arnstein, the gambler and the man who got away. The big song, the big showpiece song, where Barbra Streisand sings, "My Man, I Love Him So," is about Nicky Arnstein, and of course is also about Omar Sharif, because they started to have a relationship on set and it was deeply serious. Omar Sharif said, I just was obsessed. I just was totally obsessed, and so was she. I mean, this was the most beautiful man in the world at the time. Unfortunately, it was also the time of the Arab-Israeli war. Barbra Streisand was a big, big supporter of Israel. And of course, as you can imagine, this did not go down well in the Arab-speaking world. He kisses her on screen. Everyone knew that they were having a relationship off screen. He was persona non grata, big time.
There was outcry, especially in Egypt and across the Arab world, saying, you know, he shouldn't be in this role. His citizenship from Egypt should be revoked. But eventually the controversy died down. I wouldn't say he's the best singer for their duets, but he carries it off because he has such confidence and such charm and that sort of innate likability that Omar Sharif has. So I think even when he doesn't hit all the right notes, you forgive him.
You are someone I've admired. Still, our friendship leaves something to be desired. Does it take more explanation than this? You are woman, I am man. Let's kiss.
It was a part he'd never played before. Barbra Streisand was the show business miracle. She was a huge star, huge. And to be in this picture was a big breakthrough for him in many ways.
It was a huge success, an enormous success.
You're crazy to come back. You know Judge Bergerman put a price on your head.
You know, that's funny. I never lay eyes on that Judge Bergerman, but he don't like me. Well, someday me and him will meet, and I will take his head in a basket. Anyway, I came back after that map you burned up.
Why? You can buy a dozen just like it for $1 apiece.
Just by way of a change, he decided to do a Western, and of course was fairly easily cast as a Mexican in McKenna's Gold. I have to say, he chose the wrong Western, because McKenna's Gold, whatever it was intended to be, it doesn't succeed. And I mean, it is an unholy mess of a movie. It's half a disaster movie, it's half a sort of quest for gold movie, it's half a Western. I don't know what it is, and I don't think it ever knows what it is, really.
He was sort of condemned by his stardom to appear in big films. Very difficult for him to appear in more intimate films, which he would have liked to have done, because he felt that he was a better actor than some of the parts he was given.
In the early 1970s, Omar Sharif's stardom began to wane as the actor's films fell out of favour with the moviegoers.
There's no question that his particular style of romance was falling out of fashion. I'm not sure that it was him who was becoming less good. I think he was as good as he always was. It's just that the idea of him was falling out of fashion, and those films that he would like to have made were no longer in the sort of public eye. So he was drifting a little bit. And he was making some poor choices. There were one or two highlights, and there were one or two interesting highlights in that particular period. And one of them was The Last Valley, which looked like a sort of historical romp, really. It was about the 30 Years' War, in which he starred opposite Michael Caine.
There's famine all over Germany. Plague, pestilence, even now. And winter's coming. In 10, 20 years, have you seen a richer valley?
I don't answer questions.
Take their grain and cattle, and they starve this winter.
I'm tiring of you. Come to your point.
I'm there now, Captain. Take all this food back to your army, and down it goes into 1,000 stomachs. Why such waste?
It's a really interesting little epic. The problem was it came at a time when the epics were failing and just sort of drifting away, and it was a huge flop. A lot of money was spent on it. And it was just seen as this kind of, this old dinosaur of a film, which is kind of unfair, because I think, it showed Sharif for all the qualities he had, and actually showed Michael Caine in a much different role. And again, it's one of those sort of hidden gems in his career that are sort of wrongly dismissed.
I have a good career. I have a wife who is a famous specialist. She is young and nice looking. I belong to a great country and a great socialist movement, which one day will be accepted by the whole world.
God forbid.
How could he if he doesn't exist? Now, don't interrupt me. I am playing at capitalism and counting my assets. I am healthy, and I can have women when I want them, except for you.
Around the time when he made The Tamarind Seed with Julie Andrews, he's not really getting offered those huge parts in the big epics anymore. So this was a great role for him. He's playing a Russian agent who meets this British civil servant on holiday and woos her. And the chemistry between them is, once again, very good. It's nice to see him playing a different kind of Russian after Dr. Zhivago.
There were scenes, there were moments when this film captures his own intensity, his own sort of seriousness, his own ability to do one-on-one, which is very hard in a picture of that size, to be able to play with another actor and make it as intimate and intense. That was one of his great gifts. He could do that. He could take a scene and bring it right down and make it one-on-one.
Would you like to swim?
Loda said you were not to go away from the bungalow.
I know, but I am a man and I want you. And if I can't have you, then I must occupy myself with some pleasant distraction which will keep my frustration to a minimum.
Has it ever occurred to you that I might be slightly frustrated myself?
Then come to bed with me. Or come swimming.
I think that they play off each other quite well. She obviously adored him, and I think he rather liked her.
Some of the passengers are asking questions.
Any specific question?
Why are we sailing in circles?
Tell them that we enjoy sailing in circles. That 7 men are going to jump into the sea from an aeroplane.
I think I'm joking.
So?
Juggernaut is a great film that is usually lumped in with all the rest of those disaster films, especially from America in the 1970s. But it's actually a little bit smarter, a bit more savvy, a bit more realistic than some of those films.
Juggernaut really, is a film of its era, and that era was the kind of disaster movie. It was so likely the way that Sharif's career had unfolded that he would be put into one of these films. It's very corny and of its day, but you can look at it in the sense of how Sharif had maybe carved out a place for himself as an actor.
If my ship were an aircraft in the sky, there'd be no question of playing with her life.
We'll try cutting a hole into the drum.
My employers would be on every street corner looking for someone to hand their money to.
If it doesn't work, at least it will contain the blast.
Look, this is still my ship.
Maybe hadn't fulfilled the promise of the very early careers, but he really was, still maintaining a profile. The idea of Omar Sharif had a kind of cachet. Whatever the film was, you kind of thought, well, Omar Sharif is part of the list. It added a glamour to everything.
Throughout his career, especially starting after Lawrence of Arabia, Omar Sharif was something of an icon. He was a recognizable international superstar. That star never waned, really. Even if he wasn't getting the best roles at any given year, he was still very famous. People really liked him. He was always this charming man. He was also well known for playing bridge. He was one of the best bridge players in the world. He wrote books about playing bridge. So he had a sort of second sideline career that he was also very good at.
In 1978, Omar Sharif joined the film Ashanti, late in production.
She's as lively as an unbroken colt.
What price are you asking for her?
$200,000.
That's a high price, even for a virgin.
There is inflation, Your Highness, even for virgins.
I can't keep awake.
She's very tired.
Perhaps the worst film he made at this particular junction, perhaps the worst film he made in his career, was Ashanti, which was supposedly a film about modern-day slavery, and just about everything went wrong with this film.
They had Beverly Johnson in it, who was a big supermodel. She was a Naomi Campbell, a huge supermodel. And they cast her in the lead. Unfortunately, she couldn't act, and so they had to sack her, and they got rid of the director, everything. And Michael Caine, who's a real businessman of the cinema as well as a professional, he and Omar Sharif hold this picture together.
Things went wrong on the set. The heat was unbearable. A camel fainted.
During these years, he played an enormous number of television parts, all sorts of big roles: Ten Commandments, Anastasia, Catherine the Great. He was always on in major television productions in either England or America.
He was a chain smoker and then some. And inevitably he had a heart attack in the early 90s. And it was an early warning of, that the health was now under question. And he therefore gave up smoking, and that was considerable of effort, to give up 100 cigarettes a day. But yeah, he kind of slowed down his career as well. And I think there's a certain sense of scaling back, understanding his health, wasn't so good.
Je m'appelle pas Momo.
Je sais que tu t'appelles Moïse. C'est bien pour ça que je t'appelle Momo. C'est moins impressionnant.
Qu'est-ce que ça peut vous faire, je m'appelle Moïse? Moïse, c'est juif, c'est pas arabe.
Je ne suis pas arabe, Momo. Je suis musulman. 5,80.
Pourquoi mon père dit va chez l'arabe, si vous êtes pas arabe?
Arabe, bon mot, ça veut dire ouvert de 8h du matin jusqu'à minuit. Et même le dimanche dans l'épicerie.
After a sort of rather fallow period, he had a very late revival in Monsieur Ibrahim, which was one of those films that sort of just came out of nowhere.
He played an old Turkish shopkeeper who befriends a Jewish boy. It was a lovely little film, possibly his very best acting. And he loved doing it because he wanted to be in films which meant something, and this certainly did. And he won the French César Award as Best Actor.
C'est de mauvaises chaussures, tu sais. Demain, je t'emmène en acheter.
Mais j'ai pas d'argent.
C'est moi qui te les offre. T'as qu'une seule paire de pieds, tu sais. Faut en prendre soin. Si les chaussures te blessent, tu les changes. Tes pieds, tu peux jamais en changer.
It was one of those films and one of those performances that makes you wish that he'd perhaps gone to Europe earlier in his career and made more films of that caliber.
Omar Sharif's great career came to an end in July 2015 when he died in a Cairo hospital at age 83.
Does it surprise you, Mr. Bentley? Surely you know the Arabs are a barbarous people, barbarous and cruel. Who but they? Who but they?
His legacy is that he was definitely a pioneer and a role model for Arab actors. He was amongst the first to actually cross over into a Hollywood career, a very successful Hollywood career for a time, and to maintain a certain credibility as well as a huge following and loyal following.
Do you think it's personal, petit bourgeois and self-indulgent?
He represents the Arab as a cosmopolitan, as an intellectual, as a man of the world, you know. He gets away from the cliche. You know, he brings forth Sharif Ali and, and makes him a man of the world and did a lot for the whole Western sort of cliched idea of what Egyptian life was like. So I think in that sense, he is one of the great sons of Egypt.
You stare into my eyes to see if I'm lying. Well, people can lie with their eyes.
We know him as a great star. We know him as the great star that he was and the great actor that he was. But also, in the Arab world, he is immortal. So he shines in two worlds.
He was a heartthrob to many, but he was also an actor with substance.
God be with you, English.
From Mother's Milk to One Hot Minute, Californication to Stadium Arcadium. A funky trip through the career of music icons Red Hot Chili Peppers. New Friday night at 8 on Sky Arts.